Alright, I talked about my top 15 favorite fighting games. And you know, I love me some fighting games. You know what I don't like? Fighting games that suck. And it just so happens that there are a lot of fighting games that suck. From chasing trends without understanding them, to just being flash with no substance, or just plain old incompetence, what could have been a great time ends up sucking. Today, we're going to go through 15 fighting games that suck, and find out why they suck. Let's lay down some ground rules. Number 1, I obviously have to have played the game in question, so sorry, no 3DO games are on this list. So that means no Way of the Warrior for those expecting that on here. Number 2, what determines this game placement is how bad the game sucks. Lane characters and graphics can help, but the fighting must absolutely suck first and foremost. And number 3, one game per franchise. Though outside of a few, I highly doubt these things would even spawn a franchise. Let's go through this pile of garbage one by one, and find out which fighting game is the one that sucks the most balls. Yes, you saw that silhouette correctly, and you're probably wondering yourself, wait a minute, how can there be a Street Fighter on this list? The series has pumped out consistent quality, you will say, and you'd be right. Since Street Fighter 2, this series has been consistently awesome. However, nobody ever talks about Street Fighter 1, outside of it just being the game that precedes Street Fighter 2. And for good reason, this game blows! The controls in this game are horrible, and the special moves only work when they feel like it, I swear. And I'm playing the 6-button version, so I can't even imagine how terrible the pressure-sensitive pads must be. The hits also feel like there's no actual weight to them, and the neutral feels extremely sloppy, and I swear the AI just loves to just teleport because of just really weird collision detection. And I know someone's gonna go, but Dr. Earth and Robotnik, this is the first entry in Predated most fighting games actually go. So you're just gonna have to accept it, and I would say that's a fair take. If it weren't for the fact that ER Kung Fu predates this game by 2 years and is an infinitely better game despite being extremely primitive by today's standards. So even for the time, this game sucks. I'm only placing this though at number 15 due to it being an outlier more than anything, and you know, there wasn't a whole lot of standards, but at the same time, it only defends this game so far. For all intents and purposes, the series may as well start with Street Fighter 2. Oh goody, I get to talk about Mortal Kombat clones. We all know the story by now, but for those that live under a rock, let me give you a quick refresher. In 1992, Mortal Kombat was huge, like huge, and one of the biggest reasons the series went as big as it was due to its gratuitous violence, which not only pissed off parents, but also tons of politicians to the point that we have a rating system. However, that just added to its appeal to the MTV generation. Obviously, many copycats followed, even from the same studio. And don't worry, we'll get there in a bit. But here's one you may or may not recognize. Bloodstorm! My god, this game screams 90s comic book in the worst possible way. Featuring character designs that Rob Liefeld would throw in the trash, an edgy as hell backstory that's almost comical, and gameplay that would bore even the most shallow of fighting game fans. The main gimmick of this game is that you can sever limbs in the middle of combat, but doing so, you may as well just kill the opponent outright, which makes the whole thing kinda pointless, and it's a glorified instant kill. You can also take your opponent's special weapons, which for the time was kinda innovative, almost like Mega Man, but I don't know how to use this very well, admittedly. The combat also feels very shallow, with no real depth to back it all up, which pretty much renders any potential fun, even if this game is a joke, to feel short-lived. It feels like this game was trying too hard to set up a series without having a good game to back it up first. I actually feel bad about having to trash this, as Star Wars as a series actually has a decent enough world to make a great fighting game. Alas, Star Wars, The Masters of Teras is one of those games that just happens to be a massive disappointment. Taking place between episodes 4 and 5, this game features the expected established characters of Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie, alongside a few characters original in this game like Arden Lin, Thok, and best of all, a Tusken Raider named Hor! You cannot make this shit up. Make fun of Star Wars names all you want, like Sheev Palpatine or Shmi Skywalker all you want. Nothing will ever top the name whore. They fucking knew. However, as great as the name whore is, sadly, the gameplay is not so lucky to be blessed. You have to arm the lightsaber wielders, which is already strike one of this game. Why the fuck would I want to play as Luke Skywalker and not have a lightsaber ready up? That'd be like if I were to play an X-Men game and not have Wolverine use his claws. Hey, wait a minute! Granted, all it takes to arm the character is a simple press of R2, not like the PS2 era Mortal Kombat games, but unlike those games, which all they did was just change your combos and frame data for certain normals, here, there's no reason not to be armed as they determine what special moves you can do. Not to also mention that some characters in the game, like Arden Lin, have no weapons at all, which pretty much throws the concept of balance out the window. Imagine playing the Mortal Kombat games that were in 3D, but you had one character with no weapons to pick whatsoever that wasn't a boss. That's Arden Lin. The combat in this game feels like a poor man's Tekken, sluggish, weightless, with fake balance all over the place, and no actual combos with the hand-to-hand combat, which for a 3D fighter in 1997 feels off. Also, I swear the special inputs are just as bad as Street Fighter 1, if not worse, where they only work when they feel like it, which again, for 1997, is a bad design choice. It's safe to say that the Force is not strong with this one at all. If I'm being honest, not only would characters like Jar Jar Binks be better in the game, but also adding in shit like from the Holiday Special would be an improvement. Like, I am dead fucking serious. If they added Holiday Special characters, this would be a much better game, I swear. When MK4 was in development, it was being done on new hardware that was being designed for 3D gameplay. Midway wanted to test this engine before the next big Mortal Kombat game, so they made a test. That test being War Gods! War Gods is without a doubt one of the most mediocre fighters I have ever played, complete with hideous graphics that try too hard to simulate the digitized actors of yesteryear, but somehow looks more fake, the playable gods being so lame that Kratos wouldn't even find them worth killing. Extreme lame-alities that would be left out of Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, and gameplay that just merely exists. While I'm not a big fan of Mortal Kombat 4, at least that game has some moments of fun, unlike this pile of trash, where it's only worth making fun of the characters as the gameplay is just too sterile. With 3D gameplay that's more like 2.5D with a glorified sidestep button and extremely lacking combos, you truly have a fighter with no actual depth to it. When this game came out in arcades in 1996, you could have been playing better games like Soul Edge, Tekken 2, or even better 2D fare like X-Men vs. Street Fighter, The King of Fighters 96, and even Darkstalkers Revenge. Be careful what you pray for indeed, and I pray I don't ever have to touch this pile of dog shit ever again.
Maximus wins. Fatality!
While ClayFighter is commonly regarded as nothing more than a stale joke nowadays, I do feel the franchise, for what it's worth, has its charm. I personally think the original ClayFighter, and especially the Tournament Edition, are fun little SNES fighters for their time, even if they aren't as great as their contemporaries. But hey, if you ever want some fun, they can be a fun time. Sorry to ruin your day, but this entry is not ClayFighter 63 1/3. I know someone's going to ask me why, and I'm going to tell you why. I actually like 63 1/3. It's not the best fighter out there, but I honestly found it kind of fun to play, especially considering how bare the N64 fighting scene was. So anything remotely fun is worth it. Tell me with a straight face it's somehow worse than War Gods. By comparison, I am not as merciful to ClayFighter 2 Judgment Clay. Despite the name being a reference to one of the greatest action blockbusters around, not much is actually done with the Terminator reference, outside of Hoppy being an Arnold. But that's just the start of this game's problems. The claymation, for starters, is of lesser quality compared to the first game, to the point that the developers just reused tiny sprite animations from the original entry to make a point of how he looks better than the newcomers. They also unceremoniously dropped a lot of the prior cast, such as Blue Suede Goo, Ichabod Clay, and Taffy, just for lesser characters like Goo Goo, Nanaman, and Octohead. The game also takes a page from Mortal Kombat and pads out the roster with Pellet Swap Evil Twins, which are just moves that clones the main cast. So this game has 20 fighters instead of just merely 10. At least when Tekken 1 had clone characters, they were merely unplayable sub-bosses in the arcade version with their own unique models, and when they ported Tekken 1 to consoles and made them playable, they gave them their own unique moves to differentiate them. Now, onto the biggest sin this game commits. The gameplay of this game is just bad. The damage dealt feels way too little, which can cause matches to go on for way longer than they should unless you have the timer set at 50 seconds. Not only that, for some unfathomable reason, they forgot to program in throws. So you have no real ways to get past blocks outside of mix-ups, but I don't even feel like mix-ups are a thing in this, as the combos feel nearly non-existent, which pretty much ensures a lack of depth in this game. For a sequel to ClayFighter, this game takes 5 steps back, and for a game that came out in 1995, this feels somehow more primitive than the original game, especially considering how fast the fighting game scene had evolved with games like Darkstalkers breaking new grounds in the arcade. Looks like this game just couldn't break the mold. From the 90s to the early 2000s, wrestling games were huge. Like, really huge, to the point where some of the wrestling games that we got in this era were pretty freaking sweet, such as Saturday Night Slam Masters or WCW vs. NWO, which both of those games still hold up well to this day. Another thing that was still pretty huge in the era was The Simpsons. Though by 2001 the show's quality was starting to wane, it was still popular enough in popular culture that it was still a massive license. Ergo, it would make sense for a gaming executive to make a Simpsons Wrestling game. It seemed like an easy idea at the time to make some money and could have made a pretty decent party fighter. The only problem is that the Simpsons Wrestling is without doubt one of the worst fighting games I have ever played. In fact, calling this game as a wrestling game feels like a misnomer, as it's more like a crappy Power Stone than an actual wrestling game. There's no grapples or takedowns, you know, the techniques that make up the backbone of professional wrestling. All you do in this game is running around the ring, mashing buttons in a war of attrition to take down your foe. Add in ludicrously poor balance where characters are either unviable as fuck or extremely broken, and you have a recipe for disaster. While on the topic of poor balance, let's discuss good old Ned Flanders, as he is the Meta Knight of the game, where he has a projectile that homes in with his Bible, a divine bolt of retribution that shaves a health bar off like nobody's business, and of course, he's this game's equivalent to Gil as he has a fucking resurrection.
The mark of my dignity shall scar thy DNA. Welcome to your death. Ah ha 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 ha! Die! Witness my life eternal. Let me be the blesser of all souls. Ah ha 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 ha! Kneel before your master.
The only saving grace of this piece of garbage is the writing, which is admittedly kind of charming, and it's voiced by the actual VAs of this show.
Watch me closely, Grasshopper, and I will instruct you in the grapplary arts.
I think reasonable, civilized people should be able to resolve their differences without... Oh, never mind. Let's rumble!
But I can only carry this trash so far. I'd rather watch the worst Simpsons seasons in a session than play this horrid game ever again.
I am your god.
I know some people may expect Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl to be here, but that game honestly is pretty decent. Yeah, it's glorified shovelware, but it's a fun time to be had if you got friends. And even then, it feels genuinely competitively viable, and there's lots of passion put into it. Like, I genuinely can't hate this game. Though I would not recommend buying it full price, but get it on sale, it's worth your time. The same cannot be said about Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion, XL. Now, being a fan of both Smash Brothers and animation, this should have logically been a smash hit. Cartoon Network has a great back catalog of characters to work with for a crossover game, and to this game's benefit, I would argue this game has a pretty alright roster out the bat, which mostly consists of classic characters, though admittedly the only character that had a show currently airing at that point was Ben 10, who had Ultimate Alien at the time. And there are some noticeable omissions, such as the ads, No Courage, and No Mordecai and Rigby being very notable examples. But, as I've said a few times already on this list, that's probably the least of this game's concerned. The game, at a simple glance, appears to be a knockoff of Smash Brothers, but had this just been merely a knockoff, this could have probably been salvageable at the very worst. Kind of like how the original World Heroes is for Street Fighter 2, where, despite it being a Street Fighter knockoff, it's okay in its own right. But no, this game goes beyond. The physics feel atrocious, which makes DIs practically useless and recoveries are a little trickier to do. Not to mention that almost every character is packing some heavy amount of weight to them, which further adds to the problematic physics. It also makes the gameplay last way longer than it should, which is a massive flaw for fighting games, as it may take forever to kill your opponent. The balance is also horrendous, with certain notable offenders being the Powerpuff Girls being absolutely broken, and Grim zoning is like absolute horseshit, to the point where I swore I was playing as Gordeo from Under Night in Birth. It also feels like a lot of this game feels like there's no passion put into it, as a lot of the moves are just straight up made up for the game, despite a few moves also being straight up references. I understand that having to create moves for characters like Mac and Blue, because Foster's was more of a slice-of-life comedy, and admittedly some of the made-up moves like the Blue Token is actually pretty rad, but I think a moveset similar to Captain Commando could have been kinda cool, where he can summon in the other friends as assist characters, but that's just me personally. And even then, I feel like just the amount of lack of passion even shows in the alternate costumes, where some of them are direct references to the show, such as Captain Planet having Captain Pollution, but you have Samurai Jack who has a generic ninja outfit. At least the concept isn't wasted for this, with the upcoming multiverses, which almost feels like an apology for this game. Hashtag ads for multiverses.
Not even a challenge.
Most anime arena brawlers get a bad rep from the FGC, and for the most part, it makes sense, as a good amount of these games are flash over substance. But for what it's worth, most of these games aren't exactly bad, just rather decent but forgettable due to the fact that a lot of these are just made for casual play sessions rather than hardcore tournament play. Hell, even I'll enjoy a decent arena brawler from time to time, like Watch Justice 2 for an example. However, there are sometimes ones that just come so bad, it makes the most casual friendly fighter look like Third fucking Strike by comparison. And that game is Jump Force. For starters, this game is ugly as fuck. All the characters in this game look like bootleg anime figures. Hell, the anime figures I actually own look better than the character models in this game. The performance is also highly questionable. For the record, I'm playing this on a base PS4, and this game I know for a fact has outright crashed on me in the past for no other reason than this game is so poorly optimized, and even then, the menu, frame dips like a bitch. Hell, my buddy Mr. Reckhamgood, who helped me record multiplayer footage for this game, had this game struggle on his PS5, so this game must be extremely poorly optimized if the fucking PS5 can't run this right. The story mode of this game feels like an extremely bad fanfiction with a presentation that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite would find laughable. However, that's the least of this game's problems. Now, let's move on to the fighting, which is bland as all get out. All you do is hit buttons, and normally, I would say cool shit happens, but I can barely fucking tell what's going on. Supers also barely deal damage as well. Let's take a look at Dio's Road Roller. Did you see that? It did fuck all, and it's his ultimate super, and there's a shit ton of motion blur, so now I have a fucking headache. And I mean, again, I know this is an arena fighter, so this may be typical, but again, if One's Justice 2 is pretty fun for my hardcore fighting ass, they clearly dropped the fucking ball here. The combat feels weightless, and the super animations feel extremely soulless, which for an anime arena brawler is pretty shit, as the supers are supposed to look flashy as hell. Blocks are also nearly impenetrable, so the only way you can break them is to throw, but throws are extremely stubby due to this game having really shit depth perception. Not to also mention, this is one of those anime games that try way too hard to follow the canon so closely that the balance ends up reflecting that. So you'll have characters like Sanji, who is always hard countered if he fights someone that's a woman. This game's so mediocre and forgettable that it's delisted as of last February. Bandai Namco felt this game was so forgettable they had to erase it from history. And normally, I would mourn something like that. However, for this game, I genuinely do not care whatsoever. Because this game sucks. On the bright side, at least getting caught playing this is less embarrassing than being a Rent-A-Girlfriend fan.
Oh, the camera's on. The camera's been on the whole time, huh? I don't even know.
No, I'm not joking. There's no punchline. Rent-A-Girlfriend's just shit.
Welcome to your death. Die! Ah ha 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 ha! Kneel before your master.
I know almost everyone complains about the AAA market of overhyped games that underdeliver like Cyberpunk, but if you ask me, the problem's always been around, and if you want proof of that, look no further than Rise of the Robots, a fighting game from 1994 that was hyped to hell and back for its admittedly pretty cutting edge for the time graphics. Too bad they forgot to make a game with their slideshow. Featuring a page on Art of Fighting for the single player campaign, you can only control the most deep and unique fighting character of all, Cyborg. Which is bad enough that I can't play as the other robots for the arcade mode, but for some stupid reason, one schmuck is always locked into him for a multiplayer as well, which kinda kills this game competitively. Imagine if one player was locked into Ryu, but player 2 could pick anyone else on the roster. That game wouldn't be as impactful if that were the case. We're off to a great fucking start already, but add in extremely basic controls, a paltry amount of special moves for the entire roster, no real combos, and AI so brain dead you could just quarter kick them to victory. You have a game so bad, it destroyed the trust in British video game journalism, since several British magazines gave this game suspiciously high review scores, despite this being dog shit, just so they could cover the damn game. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Watch this video by Kim Justice for more information. Looks like this game's going to a scrap heap. To get an idea how behind the time this game was when it finally came out, Killer Instinct came out 2 months before this game in arcades, and not only looks but plays a bajillion times better. Hell, the SNES port on Killer Instinct that came out a few months later in 1995 looks way better considering how much of a graphical downgrade that was to even get that on the SNES. Oh hey, look at the time. It's time to look at another Mortal Kombat clone. Now, Time Killers has certainly a cool concept going for it, where you have a bunch of random dudes throughout time handpicked by death to compete in a tournament to determine the strongest warrior throughout history. Which is admittedly an awesome concept for a fighting game. You can have so many fighters throughout history battling to the death to find out who is the deadliest warrior. Too bad that World Heroes and Eternal Champions handled this concept much better. For starters, you have like 4 characters in this from the future in some capacity, which feels not only stupid but redundant. Not to mention the characters in this game feel like rejected World Heroes and Eternal Champions characters combined. But as I've stated before, a lot of these shitty games, that's the least of this game's problems. This game wanted to be cutting edge and have the violence more easy to do than MK, and that includes hacking off limbs and cutting off heads during the match. While it is certainly a bit entertaining for like 2 minutes, this gimmick wears on you fast as it only masks the shallow mechanics for so long. Not only that, but as a consequence, this game can have matches that end quicker than Guilty Gear The Missing Link if you get one lucky decapitation. As typical with shitty fighting games, the controls are terrible and the special moves are poorly executed. The graphics also are dog shit for the time. Sad thing is, this isn't even the worst Mortal Kombat clone out there. If you guys know about Mortal Kombat clones, you are expecting this entry to be merely mentioned on the list, as you can't talk about Mortal Kombat clones without at least bringing up Kasumi Ninja, the premier Jaguar fighter. Let me get this out of the way. I ran into a shit ton of emulation problems with this one, as the character select screen had some weird slowdown, and I noticed graphic glitches such as the floor not really showing up and just being this black void. But the actual fighting itself had no real emulation glitches as far as I could tell, so I'm probably just convinced that even playing this on legitimate hardware wouldn't have been better at all. Which is good, because I'm not spending a lot of money on a Jaguar, because a Jaguar sucks ass. Before we get into how bad the gameplay is, let's talk about this awful character select screen. As you all know, fighting games have a traditional character select to easily pick your characters, and even bad character select screens such as BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle can at least function as a character select screen. But this game's character select screen is ass. You have this weird first-person mode where you touch a statue of your character, then you select your opponent in the arcade mode, and you have to do this every single time you're playing the arcade mode. This game practically reeks out of every worst trait of every Mortal Kombat knockoff. Terrible character designs with laughable special moves, lousy fatalities, and absolutely frustrating controls and special moves. To do special moves, you have to hold down the C button, then you do the input, which is extremely non-intuitive, but it has worked in better games like Primal Rage. However, in this piece of shit, the moves only have like 3 seconds of delay, which makes almost every move unsafe to use. Not only that, the control itself is extremely laggy, which is an absolute crime of a fighting game where every second counts. The movement feels extremely slow, and jump-ins feel extremely awkward. Combos in this feel like an afterthought, which at this point seems to be a running theme with these crappy fighting games. Show no mercy, alright. Show no mercy to this game. I got a small feeling I'm bound to piss off some older viewers with this, as this game at the time was critically acclaimed, due to it being a fancy new launch title, but I honestly feel that's just due to this game being styled with no substance backing it, and because Tekken wasn't on the PS1 until another month later. Our entry here is Battle Arena Toshinden, one of the earliest 3D fighters to hit consoles, but one that has aged by far the worst. You thought Soul Edge was primitive compared to Calibur? You, my friend, have not played Toshinden. Featuring some of the stiffest movement of any 3D fighter that would make the original Tekken embarrassed, gameplay that can't decide if it wants to be 3D or 2D with its Street Fighter style special moves, and character designs that look like third-rate Guilty Gear characters, you got a fighter that was destined to be forgotten after its honeymoon period. Even this game's big, innovative feature at the time, the sidestep was clunky compared to how it would be refined in future games like Tekken 3 or Soul Edge. I know someone's going to tell me that I have to look at their perspective at the time, but when the original Virtua Fighter and Tekken are still better games than you, I'm sorry. Even then, you had better 2D games at the time like Street Fighter Alpha or Mortal Kombat 3 available on the PS1 at that point, so there's really no excuse for this pile of trash. At least the soundtrack is pretty decent. Hell, it's way better than the game even deserves. Oh hey, Accolade, the dudes that publish Bubsy have a fighting game under their belt. What could possibly go wrong? Ah, crap.
Oi. 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 Oi.
And yes, this is in fact Balls 3D's main menu theme, and yes, this sounds like porn. That's not even the worst of this game's problems. As you can see, the characters are all made out of, well, balls. But this comes with a problem. What the actual fuck are these character designs? I can easily tell that Krunk and Boomer are a caveman and a clown, respectively, but the rest of the character designs are nonsensical. But then you get the gameplay, which is just a fucking mess. The combat of this game is the literal definition of button mashing with no real strategy or depth beyond that. And the special moves feel extremely unintuitive. And the movesets feel extremely limited as well, which for a 3D fighter is paltry, as the main appeal of 3D fighters is the absolute heavy amount of options. The movement is also really bad for a 3D fighter, where walking left and right feels like I'm stuck in heavy gravity, and the sidestep is them just taking a leisurely pace which defeats the purpose of sidestepping, a quick dodge. And I mean, this game came out before Toshinden, and at least Toshinden was cutting edge at the time. This is just something that shouldn't have been attempted on the SNES. Like, with shit like this in the Bubsy series, it's no wonder Accolade went defunct. And yes, I know Accolade didn't develop the game, it was PF Magic, but Accolade still published this. But for all we know, Accolade could have heavily meddled with this game and made this game even more dog shit than it could have been. At least the title is accurate because this game is balls. If there's one franchise that makes perfect sense to make into fighting games, that would be Dragon Ball. And why wouldn't it? The main selling point of the series is the fast-paced battles and the awesome fight choreography. And everyone has abilities that would translate excellently into movesets, which we've seen with games like Budokai 3 and especially the recent Dragon Ball FighterZ. However, there's also a good amount of shitty Dragon Ball games out there. Originally, one game I was considering on the list was Dragon Ball Taiketsu. However, that just felt more like a poor man's Street Fighter, and at least that was on the GBA. Though, in all fairness, you also have games like Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors, which is actually genuinely really fun. But then I found Ultimate Battle 22 on the PlayStation, and that game is fucking horrendous. However, then I found out it had a successor, Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, and oh boy is this game bad! First off, the fact that it's based on GT is already a bad sign, but hey, maybe a crappy license could potentially have a great game. But we're being cautiously optimistic about that. First off, none of the English VAs in this game tune in a good performance, but to be fair, this is before we got the current Funimation cast, and I don't even think the Ocean dub was available at that point. But even for the time, the dub is bad for the standards of video game voice acting, which is a shame considering we got talented VAs in here like Steve Bloom.
You jerk! Now there's no one that can beat me at this moment.
It's also one of those weird early games where they did not bother dubbing in the grunts, so you'll have the Son Goku family switch to Noaza in gameplay. But that's the least of this Dragon Turd's problems. The movement of this game is stiff. Like, really stiff. It would embarrass Battle Arena Toshinden to be this stiff, and this is saying something. Unlike the fast, frantic battles in canon, this feels like I'm playing with action figures, but I'd rather be doing that instead, as that's actually more fun than playing crappy fighting games. Performing the special moves in this feel very awkward, and the moves also are very massively underwhelming. Keep in mind, these beams are strong enough to destroy planets. The flow of this game also gets interrupted a lot of the time when someone does a special move, where they go into the cinematic mode, which is a massive pace breaker. Don't get me started on aerial combat, where the stiff movement gets even worse and makes the combat even more awful. This game's movement makes Kasumi Ninja feel like Guilty Gear by comparison. The only redeeming feature of this game is the opening, the decent soundtrack, and the hilariously awful dub. I'm convinced that watching Dragon Ball Evolution is less painful than playing this game. You want something on the original PlayStation to give you the high energy fighting DBZ is known for? You're better off playing the original Guilty Gear, and I damn well mean that.
Now let me show you the force of my true power.
Alright, it's time for a quick recap of the top 15 worst fighting games. Number 15, Street Fighter 1. Number 14, Bloodstorm. Number 13, Star Wars, The Masters of Teras Kasi. Number 12, War Gods. Number 11, ClayFighter 2, Judgment Clay. Number 10, The Simpsons Wrestling. Number 9, Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion XL. Number 8, Jump Force. Number 7, Rise of the Robots. Number 6, Time Killers. Number 5, Kasumi Ninja. Number 4, Battle Arena Toshinden. Number 3, Balls 3D. And number 2, Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Only one game will be the worst fighting game of all time. Let's see what we got. Let's be real, you totally saw this one coming. And why wouldn't it? Shaq Fu is everything fighting games should avoid being in every conceivable way. Like, I would argue this is the antithesis to Third Strike. The very premise of this game is stupid, where Shaquille O'Neal is transported to Outworld or some shit, and he has to fight a bunch of rejected fighting game characters. But as I've stated before, that's definitely the least of this game's problems. The graphics are a mixed bag, but the sprites are way too tiny. These would have worked better in DSi's more cinematic adventure games, but for a fighting game, these make attacks feel stubbier than they should. And due to the animations, this ends up causing the controls to lag a little bit, but we'll get there in a bit. The soundtrack is bland, repetitive, and monotonous, with an attempt at an urban sound just massively failing, as if this was composed by a dude that was pretty fly for a white guy. The control is awful. Like, you don't know how awful it is until you play it. My God, forward movement in this is so much of a joke, and it somehow feels stiffer than GT Final Bout, which is one hell of an accomplishment. As a result, a better way to move around is to jump, but that has its own set of problems. The jumps feel laughably laggy and low gravity, almost as if I was playing the original Virtua Fighter instead of a 2D fighting game. The special move detection, I swear, flat out does not work, which is embarrassing for 1994, as I can get moves to work in Street Fighter 1. I've done every type of combination and nothing comes out of it. I feel like a broken record at this point, but yet again, combos are nothing more than an afterthought in this. This game is so notoriously bad, there's a website dedicated to finding every copy of this game and destroying them. And to even non-fighting game fans, this game is shorthand for one of the worst video games of all time. Like, it is up there with games like Big Rigs, Over the Road Racing, Ride to Hell Retribution, and
I'd rather play E.T. on Atari than play this right now.
In fact, who the hell asked for this anyways? Sports fans would just stick to playing NBA Jam, fighting game fans already had Super Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2 they could be playing on the SNES and the Genesis, and fans of both sports and fighting games would just probably know better than to stay the hell away from this piece of shit. Like, if you were to give me a choice that in order for me to avoid death, I would have to watch a double feature of both Kazam and Steel, or I'd have to win a Shaq Fu tournament, I would just take the double feature of movies, as that's less painful than playing this fucking stinker of a game. Like, my god, this is without a doubt a bad game. And I know someone's gonna go, but this game's reputation is over-exaggerated. No, you have not played this game. This game flat out doesn't work. This is so non-functional as a fighting game. Like, oh my god. Like, I thought Kasumi Ninja was bad. I thought GT Final Bout was bad. But no, this is horrible. Like, my god. How do you fuck up this bad with fighting games? Like, jeez.
You're doing it wrong.
You have a problem.
So you're probably wondering to yourself, why did I make a top 15 list of shitty fighting games? Well, we did a top 15 good list, and I felt like, why not do a list of shitty fighting games? And there's also the fact that I feel like if you really want to appreciate the good, you're gonna have to play the bad on occasion. So we can have a truly good perspective on what makes a fighting game great. So you gotta see what happens when a fighting game is terrible. However, do you agree with the list, or do you disagree with the list? Feel free to mention that in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe. This is Dr. Arthur Robotic, and I'll see you all next time.
You should know more than anyone else that you can't defeat me.